continuing with your geology doodle notes. So go ahead and label this next part, oceanic crust and oceanic crust. So oceanic crust is basalt and basalt. So what happens when you have under the ocean, you have two different kinds of crust that are coming against each other. So they're converging. Do they push each other up like continental and continental crust do? They actually do not. So this is what happens. Let's go ahead and draw the process. So we have here one oceanic crust and we have another oceanic crust. So one of them that's going to subduct is the one that has more buildup sediments. So this would be the older crust. So remember, crust is formed at divergent plate boundaries, and crust can be older or newer crust. Now in the ocean, sediments, which are pieces of rock, little pieces of rock, dirt, they fall to the ocean floor and build up over time. And so this increases the mass, which then increases the density. And so the older crust will be more dense. And so because it's more dense, it's going to subduct below the newer crust. And so down here, again, you can go ahead with your red colored pencil or pen or pink marker, highlighter. Go ahead and draw on your magma that's under the, the crust. And then we're going to draw our ocean water up here to show that this is happening completely under the ocean. There's our fish to show us it's in the ocean. So over here we have these cracks also from the pressure of the sliding plates. And our magma is going to seep up here through the cracks and out into the ocean. So it's going to hit that cold ocean water and solidify into igneous rock. And then over a lot of years, you're going to have more come out and solidify. And then you're going to end up building this mass of underwater volcano, which we call a seamount. And eventually it's going to break the surface of the water, and now we have an island. And so our volcanic islands are made through this process. So this is a volcanic island. And because there's a whole bunch of them that are made along the plate boundary, we call it a volcanic island arc because they kind of make a little arc shape like that. And so the best examples of this are the islands of Japan and then the Aleutian Islands up in Alaska. And I'll show you where that is on the next slide. This is not the island of Hawaii, and I'll explain that in a minute too. That's something different. So we have the same situation here off the coast where you have subduction and this plate bends back, and then eventually the pressure releases and it snaps backwards, and then all this water is displaced. And so that's how you end up with tsunamis coming to the coast of Japan, which happened a few years ago. They had the massive earthquake, which happened here off the coast in the subduction zone, and it sent a tsunami on land. So the next thing you need to know, and you can just write this again on your blank sheet of paper, is what causes earthquakes. So let's just go ahead and record that earthquake is when stress overcomes a locked fault. and releases stored energy. All right, so that's the basic definition that you need to know. On your map, let's go ahead and mark some of the important places that you need to know on this map of the plates. So this first map here shows us a bunch of the plates. And let's point out some of the famous locations. On your exam, you will have some maps and you will have to know the locations of these famous plate boundaries. You do not need to memorize the names of all these plates or the boundaries or what happens in each, just a few of them. So the first thing you need to know, and you can kind of highlight going down, up and down here, is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So notice I'm highlighting this here. So remember, this is a divergent plate boundary where the plates are moving away from each other. And so these plates are moving in the opposite direction, and then magma is coming up to create new crust. You can see it right here. This is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. I'm sorry, this is the Iceland, and Iceland is the only place you can see the Mid-Atlantic Ridge on land. The rest of it is under the water. And so you might want to make a note of that as well. So this is the name of it, Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Another place where you have divergent, so these plates that are coming apart from each other, is over here in Africa. I'm going to highlight it in green right here. And so this is the African Rift Valley. And so the plates are coming apart right here, and they're pulling apart, and so they're making this big rift valley there in Africa. Another important spot is over by us. So I'm going to put this red dot right here. So that's where we live, and right next to us is the San Andreas Fault. And that's the boundary between the North American plate and the Pacific plate, which are written in purple. And I'll go ahead and circle them in green. So there's the North American plate and the Pacific plate. And we are on the Pacific plate, and Palmdale is on the North American plate. So is San Francisco, by the way, is on the North American plate. So most of the United States is on the North American plate. All along the Pacific Ocean, you'll notice the ring of fire. And so these red dots are the locations of earthquakes. And you can see the vast majority of earthquakes are on plate boundaries. And the area surrounding the Pacific plate, so this whole plate boundary all along here, is the location of lots and lots of earthquakes. The next thing to notice on this map is Hawaii. So a Hawaiian hotspot, you'll notice Hawaii is right smack in the middle of the Pacific plate. So it's not a volcano that's created like what we talked about before. So this is how it's created. You have crust, and here's our ocean. All right, so there's our fish. Beneath the ocean is the crust. And we have our magma under that. There are some places where there are cracks that come up through the crust. And we call those places a hot spot. And then magma comes up and again hits the cold seawater and solidifies. And over time, it builds up and up and up, and then it breaks the surface. And this is how Hawaiian Islands were formed. But the plate moves. So the plate is moving actually this direction. And so the islands are moving in that direction. So the youngest of the Hawaiian Islands is actually further south. It's the big island of Hawaii. And then there's one under the ocean that's being made, a new island. That'll eventually break the surface in quite a long time. And so that's a hotspot volcano. The other place that occurs is in Yellowstone National Park, which we'll show you on the next map. All right, up here is the Aleutian Islands. And so the Aleutian Islands is a divergent plate boundary that we talked about on the last page. And then we have Japan, which is another divergent plate boundary. And these two are, remember, they're volcanic island arcs. And they're the most famous ones. All right, but let's talk about this. So on the AP test, these are the two most famous ones. But the AP test wants you to apply your knowledge. And so one year they actually showed a map where they had this area circled. And the kids had to look at that and go, well, that's kind of an arc shape and it's on plate boundaries, so it makes sense that that's a volcanic island arc. And so that's the kind of application you may be asked in the AP test. Be able to recognize some of these plate boundaries. The next one you need to know, if you look at the map, is over here in D. You notice that plate boundary? So that is a convergent plate boundary where the mountains are being made bigger. So this is kind of messy right here. So let's go to the next map, which is a little bit nicer. And so again, let's mark some of these famous places you need to know. So our two major hotspot volcanoes, as you have over here, you have Hawaii. That's a hotspot volcano in the middle of a plate. The other famous one is over here at Yellowstone. So Yellowstone National Park is also a hotspot volcano in the middle of the North American plate, but it's not a classic volcano shape, it's a flat volcano. All right, then up here you need to know that this is Iceland, and it's the only place you can see the Mid-Atlantic Ridge on land. So the Mid-Atlantic Ridge goes like this. And remember, it's a divergent plate boundary. All right. Then over here we have the Himalayas. And that is a convergent plate boundary. And then we have our Aleutian Islands and we have Japan. And so this is Japan. And this is the Aleutian Islands. And they're also convergent plate boundaries, but these ones are different because they have volcanic island arcs. The Himalayas are ones that are pushing up on each other. Then down here is our African Rift Valley, so that is divergent. And then over here off the coast of Oregon and Washington, we have our Cascades Mountains, which are volcanic mountains. So this is convergent. And this is where we have that subduction zone, and we have the volcanoes on land at that place. So those are the major locations that you need to know for your exam.